South Africa's leading political scientist, Bill Johnson, was with us today after a very strong piece that was written on the DA's flip-flopping over the state of disaster for Eskom. We'll find out exactly what's going on from the man himself in a moment. R.W. Johnson is well known to the BizNews community and well loved. I'll have you know, Mr. Johnson. Once again, you've actually called a spade a bloody shovel by asking about this flip-flopping of the Democratic Alliance, giving lots of reasons why in the past they were calling, or the party was calling, for a state of disaster on Eskom, and now that it actually happens, reversing its position. Is this normal in politics?
Nope. No, it's not. I don't really understand quite what has happened. There's no explanation from, which I find very strange. But the only thing that I can think of is that in one of their statements in favor of a state of disaster, I can only find one where this is mentioned. They say that they want a ring-fence state of disaster. Now, I've no idea what that is. We've never had such a thing. So it's never actually existed, and therefore difficult to know exactly what was meant by that. But, and no doubt they would now say that the state of disaster we've got is not ring-fenced. As I say, I don't understand what that would be. But otherwise, I can't see any rationale for their position.
I had a fascinating conversation with Connie Mulder from the Solidarity Research Institute on Friday, where he said it's not a good thing to have a state of disaster imposed because it gives additional powers to the president and no oversight from parliament. How bad is it from that context? Again, looking at it from a political perspective, is it something that we should not have, in your opinion?
Well, I don't see that it's going to help in any way. And indeed, Ramaphosa's appointment of a minister of electricity seems to me his way of trying not to take decisions, really. The fact is that he's already been in a position where Pravin Gordhan on the one hand and Gwede Mantashe on the other have been, to some extent, in tension over Eskom, and in which you've got this third player, the CEO of Eskom, and indeed a fourth player in the sense of the Treasury, of course, always involved. And really it needed a strong presidential decision-making. I mean, in the first instance, I think he should have supported De Ruyter and not allowed him to be forced out with his absurd accusations of treason. And he didn't even, express sympathy over the attempted assassination that he saw. So, I mean, that was very, very weak. But I think now that, appointing a yet further minister to interfere in all this is just bizarre. And it's no good. I mean, Ramaphosa needs to make some decisions himself. And he can't just keep popping people off with more ministers and more structures and more committees and so on. It won't. We've just got far too many cooks now spoiling the broth. And I don't see that's going to help at all.
There was a lot in your piece, in your article, which is on BizNews Premium, which really articulated the argument in this case. But what I did say to Connie Mulder, and I'd love to get your input on it, is perhaps politically this was the only move that Ramaphosa could have to address the situation, given the coal lobby and its power over the ANC. And you made some points about the way the ANC is funded by its Russian connections as well, which sometimes, if you follow the money, you might get to the reason for some rather strange actions.
Yes, I don't really see that the declaration of a state of disaster in itself makes any difference to dealing with the coal lobby. Again, it's a matter. I mean, you have got to have political backbone to stand up to people, and if you haven't got that, then mere words and phrases don't help. So that I don't really see that this is in itself. It's a dramatic sounding step. And in that sense, it's a sense of theatre and so forth. And it gives the general impression that the government is at last taking the matter seriously and really doing something. But, the truth of the matter is that this has now been going on 15 or 16 years since we started having power cuts. And the government has been absolutely lackadaisical over it. I mean, it's just accepted it as a fact of life, gone on. And the fact is, of course, that government ministers are not subject to power cuts. They're always exempted. So they continue quite happily without. And it's only because of the increasing rage and discontent of the electorate that the ANC has had a nasty shock. And it's looking at very, very bad opinion polls. And is panicked to some extent. And therefore, we've got this gesture. Though there is, of course, an interesting question about how a state of disaster will impact upon an election. Because can you really hold an election under a state of disaster? I don't know. Are you going to have to postpone the election or what? It's a good question, and we don't know the answer to that.
A previous discussion that we had focused on one of your articles where you said that by the end, I'm going to read this because it really is a very powerful statement. By the end, South Africa will have one of the most free market societies in the world, all brought about by the SACP and ANC. I've thought about that a lot, and remembering my early days in the internet here in South Africa, how Telkom had a stranglehold on bandwidth. And what Telkom was doing at the time was it was trickling out bandwidth and charging enormous prices for it. But eventually it was forced to open the market, and bandwidth fell by a factor of 100. And then the internet took off, and etc. We've got a different society. Is that something that could happen here as well? Building onto that statement of yours, that once the private sector comes in, as appears to be the genie's out the bottle now, that things could really become quite exciting into the future.
No, I think that is potentially happening right now, that all sorts, lots of private individuals and also many businesses are taking steps to provide their own power. And already we're told that with what is in the mix, there is up to 10,000 megawatts being planned. And one can see that very, very rapid, the takeoff in the private sector, much, much more rapid than anything in the public sector. And if they are given their head, then indeed we could find a very different situation before long, in which a very significant proportion of electricity is provided outside Eskom. And of course, in the Western Cape, we've already got Stellenbosch, Cape Town, George, etc., Russell Bay, all planning to produce their own electricity. So one can see that there is going to be a plurality of electricity producers. And I think I would cheer that on, I think that Eskom is likely to die in the long run, and that, that wasn't necessary, didn't have to happen, but it's been effectively murdered by bad management over a very long period. And I don't think it can recover easily.
And paid for presumably by the taxpayer with that 450 billion rand of debt that government has now assumed.
No, that's the millstone around the neck, and one way or another, that's coming the way of the taxpayers. Nobody else can pick that bill up.
And that comes back to that book of yours of How Long Will South Africa Survive? In that, you made a very strong case for South Africa needing outside support, financial support. How close are we now to that position? You add another 450 billion onto the debt.
Oh, well, that would make a significant difference. But look, we've been lucky in two respects. One is that we've had commodity boom pushing up the amount of money that the exchequer's been able to pull in from taxation on the major mining companies, and that has helped quite a lot. And of course, about a year or two ago, we had this refiguring of our GDP, saying it was actually 11% bigger than we'd thought, and that had the effect of shrinking the debt. So the debt is now under 80%, although approaching 80, which is high but not intolerable. But the real problem is that we're still spending more than we take in, and the government is talking about a basic income grant again, and it's got all sorts of other very expensive projects like NHI, etc., which it would like to and, it depends now on Godongwana. If he's been tough enough on civil service salaries, but he'll have to be tougher on a whole lot of other things if he's really going to start generating a primary surplus to pay the debt down, which is what he says he'll do. But, I'll believe that when I see it.
Especially with next year being an election year, usually politicians hand out the goodies in a year of a big election. I guess February is quite a nice, the budget always in February. It gives them good timing to influence the vote, perhaps.
Well, I think that anything that's going to be done in that respect has got to be done now, this year. It's no good waiting until February next year. I look, the hint is very strong of a basic income grant, which we know is difficult to fund. Everyone who's looked at it has come away saying we can't afford it. And the lobbying groups that want it tend to dodge this question of how it's going to be paid for. And it can't be dodged, that's just a fact.
So if we get back to Eskom itself, and given what has now happened with the declaration of a state of disaster, which, as you say, and certainly Connie Mulder said the same thing, is unlikely to make any difference, what then can we look forward to with Eskom?
Well, that's quite difficult to know because we've got a whole lot of people who seem to all think that if they have a plan, which would mean that we can fix this crisis quickly, and there's a tremendous political push saying it's got to be fixed almost immediately. I think the ANC, really what it means is we've got to stop having power cuts before the election, is what they mean. And it really doesn't look likely. When the Eskom board was asked for its best solution, it came up with this thing of we'll have relatively low level but permanent power cuts for 2 years, levels 3 and 4. And immediately the ANC announced its own plan which would dispense with that, although nobody can believe that they really know what they're talking about. And no doubt the new CEO of Eskom, whoever is going to do that job, will be a highly political choice. He may have his own plan, I don't know. Gwede Mantashe talks about his plan, and so on, So we really don't know at the moment. And Lord knows what the Minister of Electricity will come up with. So, that just leaves me feeling that the outlook is for continuing power cuts. And like Richard Quest, I think that I prefer the term power cut. I think load shedding is a peculiar and rather parochial coinage. And I really don't see how that's going to be prevented unless the ANC resorts once again to let's cancel all the maintenance and keep the lights on, which is what they did at the time of the World Cup, and indeed at other politically important times since then. And I feel that could happen again.
Richard Quest was very diplomatic in the way that he spoke publicly about his views on South Africa, apart from the power cuts, which he said were unimaginable. But what about your global network? How are they seeing us now?
Well, I spoke to 2 people this week, both in Britain. One just talked about the tragedy of the crumbling of South Africa's infrastructure. The other, when he was looking at, I said, we're actually going to have Putin walking around in South Africa by August, along with Xi Jinping. And that's going to be very bad optics for a lot of people. And he said, yes, this Russian alliance you've got, that's just going to accelerate the crumbling of South Africa, isn't it? And I said, yes, I fear it is. So, I mean, they're both pretty negative. It's seen as a tragedy and an unnecessary one. But, there's no feeling that anyone ought to do anything. One just they sort of tend to be spectators looking at it and marveling that the country's got itself into this sort of mess.
I'd like to close off by picking up on that point on Russia, because you explained very well how the ANC is beholden financially to the Russians.
Yeah. No, well, I mean, they share in, a 22% share in Vexelberg's United Manganese Mine, the Kalahari Mine. And we know that they are very, very pressed for finance. So I take it that the income from that mine is now a very important part of their financial situation. And, of course, among their donors, Motsepe, it must be number one, and he's got a partnership with Norilsk Nickel in his Nkomati mine. So that one way or another, there's already significant Russian leverage here. But in addition, of course, as we've seen very much over the Ukraine war, both the SACP and the ANC are intellectually sort of infuriated to that side. And, I've seen it before when Russian emissaries arrive here, and once they speak, they're immediately parroted by ANC and SACP spokesman, as if it's holy writ. So undoubtedly they're highly influential with the ANC.
And the worrying part, I guess, for the opposition parties is that you say the Russians would like the ANC to do a merger or a coalition with the EFF, which is the nightmare scenario that many people have outlined for this country post-2024. Why would the Russians want the EFF and the ANC?
I think the main thing is the Russians don't want the DA. They've made that extremely clear. They say the DA is the local representative of American imperialism, etc. And of course, the DA is strong, and I must say, I very much agree with them. Their strong position over Ukraine has been certainly noted in Moscow, and they're very, very hostile to them about that. So whatever keeps the DA away from government will be what they support. If that's the EFF, so be it.
So we have this situation here where the ANC needs money. It's getting money from Russia. Russia doesn't want the DA. That's a part of the whole picture for 2024 that not too many people have actually been joining the dots on, and could have a huge impact.
Yeah, it could. And I mean, several other things are worth mentioning in that respect. When the Americans put through this recent act countering malign Russian influence in Africa, I think it was titled, in the debates on that, they claimed that Russia had been interfering in the Madagascar election, bribing candidates and so forth. And that they're also in Uganda and Sudan, and also Prigozhin, who is the head of the Wagner Group. He also has an NGO which he sponsors called AFRIC. And AFRIC provides election monitors, and they okayed the last Zimbabwean election, which almost nobody else okayed. And they could well make an appearance down here too, I suppose. So, I mean, and we know that the Russians have been quite well practiced in election interference in the US and elsewhere. So I think it would be sensible to assume that there will be some Russian influence on the election here, certainly.
Political scientist R.W. Johnson. I'm Alec Hogg from BizNews.com.